Hey, everybody, welcome. Let's do this. Thanks for being here. We're going to get into what's been going on with Israel's special genocide operation. We're going to be getting into what's going on with Julian Assange and so much more. And I am joined by the always, and I mean always, amazing Eleanor Goldfield.
Puts a lot of pressure on me, but okay.
I'm joined by the sometimes amazing Eleanor Goldfield. Was that better? Okay. We've got everybody know what they're expecting. Everybody know what's coming up. All right, cool. And we're going to be getting into much more than that, as well as our main topic, or well, the one in the title at least, is the 10 things they, meaning I guess the government and the media, do not want to tell you about the most recent mass shooting at the Chiefs parade, and really mass shootings in general. So we will be going through all of that in just a minute. Please hit subscribe, hit share, hit all those good things. Just hit it. And let's start off with some updates on what's been going on in Israel's special genocide operation. So they're now attacking Rafah, which was the
That's where they told them to go.
It's where they told them to go. It was the final kind of area that Israel has said would be safe.
It's usually home to like 25,000 people. Now there's over 1 million people there. And 25,000 was already overcrowded because there's no place in Gaza that wasn't overcrowded to begin with. So just for reference.
Because it was an open air prison. But here's some updates. Initially Israel had said they are not attacking hospitals, and they do not attack hospitals because it is a war crime. And of course, now they've shifted the, moral line all the way to the level that they are posting, their military is posting photos of kidnapped medical workers and elderly patients at the Red Crescents, which is the equivalent of Red Cross, Al Amal Hospital, claiming that they are terrorists. And they are legit posting their war crimes now and basically celebrating them. And this is how far they've tried to move the moral line. I mean, luckily there are those of us, you and me, and hopefully everybody watching this, who are not accepting their movement of the moral goalposts. But it is horrific. Their ongoing attacks on hospitals, on journalists. Al Jazeera has just put out a statement refuting or responding to Israel's claims that it's okay for them to attack journalists because some of their journalists are terrorists, or whatever Israel says. It's just amazing garbage. Also, the UN rapporteur on human rights has been banned by Israel
for Palestinian territories, specifically.
For Palestinian territories, has been banned from going there or going to Israel because they don't want that type of coverage, right? They don't want people to be revealing their war crimes, to be revealing their genocide and the aspects of it. Although some of their aspects of their genocide, they are proudly posting about. The UN finally seems to be speaking up a little more about what's going on there. Ben Norton tweeted, the UN officials finally speak out clearly, admitting Israel is carrying out a slaughter, quote unquote, in Gaza. UN humanitarian chief said Palestinians are suffering an assault that is unparalleled in its intensity and brutality. An invasion of Rafah would be catastrophic. And, this is different than what the UN had been doing. The UN had been putting out all these mealy-mouthed statements where they would say some of their workers had been killed. And you'd be like, by who? Who exactly was it that killed the UN workers?
Passive voice is very popular.
And then I'm not going to play the video. It's horrific of them all celebrating and everything. But Israeli ministers had a big gathering where they are now calling for Israelis to settle Gaza.
They've been doing that for a while.
They've been doing that for a while.
They released like a, what was it? A tourism video, talking about how great Gaza was going to be basically once all the Palestinians were gone. And yeah, it's disgusting.
Their tourism ministry, I brought this story a few weeks to you guys. Ministry put out a plan to build the world's largest Ferris wheel at the Gaza border fence or border barrier or whatever. and have hotels there and basically make it like a Disney World to celebrate their genocide in Gaza. And here's what the U.S. has been doing, our amazing politicians. A Democratic senator in his speech on the floor, what's his name again? Van Hollen, something like that.
Van Hollen, no, because I think
Van Hollen.
Oh, Van Hollen. Oh,
Van
okay.
Hollen. He gave a speech on the floor saying that these are war crimes, saying the U.S. What should the U.S. do when the Netanyahu government refuses to prioritize the release of the hostages? He attacked Netanyahu in multiple ways. And then he voted to send $14 billion to Israel anyway. So while they're going out on the floor, and this is the same with Joe Biden. I mean, Joe Biden's not using those words, but criticizing what Israel's doing, criticizing they don't use the word genocide, but some of them, like Van Hollen, have used the word war crimes, criticizing what Israel's doing. And then they turn around and vote for $14 billion to go to Israel to facilitate their genocide, to facilitate their ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, which is interesting because I was just checking this because Van Hollen is our senator in Maryland. He has actually called for a ceasefire and wanted and was one of several U.S. lawmakers who put forth an amendment to condition aid to Israel, but then voted anyway for the unconditional aid.
And it really shows you how our U.S. government works, at least when it comes to U.S. empire, but when it comes to supporting the apartheid state of Israel, even when they will say these things, they still turn around and vote to send more bombs to kill children.
Which is also why I don't give a shit what the UN says, because they have no power. So it's kind of like, it's nice that the UN finally officially said something. But to be clear, their UN Special Rapporteur on Palestinian territories, Francesca Albanese, who you just mentioned,
she's pretty great.
She's said amazing shit. Like from the beginning, she's said amazing shit. Has also not mattered in terms of policy. And I'm not trying to blast her. Like, she's been doing a great job of like raising awareness and calling it like it is. But point being that at the end of the day, the UN has no power in terms of actually stopping a genocide. And so, because if they did, then it would already have been stopped. And so, like, even since the ICJ put out their interim ruling saying that there's merit to this case that South Africa brought, Israel's like, great, we're just going to keep genociding. And even in response to the UN, Netanyahu, I'm sorry, I'm going to get biblical for a second. Netanyahu
that sounds
quoted,
intense.
I mean, it is. Netanyahu quoted from like the Old Testament story of Amalek, which I'm not going to get too into the weeds here, but basically the Amalekites attacked the Israelites fleeing, which is not the same as the state of Israel. We've talked about this on the show before. There's 3 different Israels, and none of them biblically mention the modern nation state of Israel. That's really important. So as the Israelites were leaving and had already crossed the Red Sea, by the way, this is all mythology, okay? Then they were attacked. They were attacked because Israelites didn't actually build the pyramids. Okay, so
yeah, well, it was 1,000 years.
Yeah,
between
there's like
when
1,000 years.
It was like 1,000 years or 500 or something between when the pyramids were built and when the Israelites were there. But
anyway, so the Amalekites attacked the Israelites, and they were really brutal. And then God, in typical God fashion, told King Saul of the Israelites, you best destroy every single Amalekite, women, children, babies. God. Hashtag this is God. And so, but
God is a dick.
Yeah. But King Saul didn't. He opted instead, and it's not like he was nice. He didn't save any of the babies. He actually just saved the best animals and the king of the Amalekites.
Listen, babies don't do nearly the amount of farming that animals do.
Look, that's true. So fast forward to many years later, what happened? Oh, the Jews were in trouble again, and it's because they didn't eradicate the Amalekites. And so Netanyahu used this Old Testament example in his response to the UN basically saying, you're damn right, we're doing genocide because we have to,
Right.
Old Testament wise. So it's like
Look, old book says kill babies.
In his rebuttal,
old man says old book kills babies.
To the UN, he said, yes, genocide, because the story that's not true.
So, but one thing about the UN though is the UN security, the part of the UN that has the most power, if it has any power, is the UN Security Council, which will never do anything because the US and not Israel, but the US can veto anything. So they will always veto anything against Israel. So the Security Council, the actual kind of strongest body within the UN, not the General Assembly, will never do anything.
No, but again, like, so yeah, Van Hollen can, and this is also why, like, I think it's important to recognize, like, tactically what should be done here. And I'm not saying that people not necessarily bother the hell out of elected officials. I don't think they should be comfortable at all. I think you should hound them. They shouldn't be allowed to have dinner in peace. They shouldn't be allowed to wander the halls of Congress in peace, which is why I love what Medea Benjamin is doing. Is basically just like running around Congress being like, hey,
Nancy Pelosi nearly punched her in the face.
Which is, I mean, so I'm not saying
seeing two 16-year-old women fight in the halls of Congress would be something.
So I'm not saying
Nancy Pelosi is much older than that, but yeah.
Yeah, she's held together with like duct tape and hope. But so I'm not saying don't go after them, but also recognize tactically, like, even if you get your senator, like Van Hollen has officially called for a ceasefire. I mean, okay, but like, it doesn't matter because Biden has already sidestepped Congress to ensure that aid gets to Israel.
Well, and even
Congress just called for more aid to Israel, even those who called for a ceasefire. So it's like, this is not going to do it. What does it is disrupting the flow of capitalist colonialism, which is why what Yemen has done is so powerful, which is why blocking shit, whether that be, Elbit systems or blocking
BDS.
boats from getting shipments of weapons, like that kind of shit is where it's at.
But also, even if you could get the U.S. to stop sending aid to Israel, that does not stop the genocide. It just stops the U.S. from handing them bombs to drop on the children.
But they couldn't, they wouldn't be able to continue on without.
For a while they would.
Aid.
For a while they would. Anyway.
I guess it depends. Like some people that I've talked to said like it would literally be like a matter of weeks and then they'd run out of shit because they can't do it without the US.
Thank you, Alex, for the donation. Truly appreciate it. And yes, I would like to be in that parallel universe where we're neighbors and you give ideas for the show while you grill.
I am totally fine with that. This does not necessarily need to be a parallel universe, dude.
Can I request vegan meat though on the grill? Is that cool? Okay, so speaking of weapon shipments to Israel, and I think this might be our last update on Israel's special genocide operation, is that the court in the Netherlands has halted exports of F-35 parts to Israel, although the prime minister disagrees.
Basically. So this is another one of those moments where it's like, hey, this is really great that this Dutch court basically slammed this down and said, based on the ICJ ruling and serious violations of international humanitarian law, as they say, that the Netherlands must cease the export of F-35 fighter aircraft parts. Now, the problem is that Prime Minister.
That's actually the higher class way to say that. That's the aristocratic way. The Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister, Mark Rutte. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. If any Dutch folks out there want to correct me, please do. And the interim foreign trade minister.
Rutte?
Just have already announced plans to contest the decision, asserting that a government should decide on its foreign policies instead of a judge. Additionally, this is one of my favorite arguments for all of this shit. Experts say it becomes impossible for the industry to constantly track where materials go. Oh my gosh, is that not an argument that we've heard before?
So tough to
Look,
figure out.
I don't know if slaves are making our clothes or
could I possibly?
I can't. Yeah. I'm over here.
I'm just Nestle. I don't know what goes on in the farms. I thought those were little adults. I don't know.
and then they do the, you know, the 1-2 punch. They said there needs to be continuous monitoring, but if we just stop these exports, it could make the Netherlands look like an unreliable partner, which could ultimately lead to a decrease of all international defense exports. So
it could harm our business.
Basically
could harm the business.
And so I don't expect, while this judge is doing, you know, a good job here, I don't expect it to have any lasting effects because of this bullshit again, which is why, like, we can't just wait for our governments to be like, yeah, this is not good. Like, we have to be the ones disrupting and standing in the way as much as we can, and people are. So that.
Sorry, one more positive update on
Ish.
isn't every update we give ish on the special genocide operation in Gaza. Canada, Australia, and New Zealand have called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And also Spain has cut off their weapons shipments as well. So you're seeing a little bit. I mean, the other thing is, this has been the global South has largely been saying this in the first few weeks, with South Africa leading the way. But now you have some of the global North, at least in words and some actions, saying this needs to stop immediately.
Yeah. But again, there's like this, it's calls for a ceasefire, but then it's, I was reading earlier that Australia has given, you know, millions of dollars worth of military aid to Israel, and there's no sign that that's stopped. So it's, again, like, you're calling for a ceasefire, but you're not saying that you don't stand with Israel. And that's problematic, right? Like, you can't call for a ceasefire without talking about why you would need to call for a ceasefire in the first place.
You can't, like, if a guy's just shooting a bunch of children, you can't, like, be like, all right, I'm going to stop giving you guns to do the shooting, but also I still stand with you.
Yeah.
I'm still a big fan.
What you're doing here.
Support what you're doing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, we're going to move on. Speaking of shooting, we're going to move on to this mass shooting that just happened. Although we want to talk about the deeper issues. We don't generally cover just every mass shooting that happens, but the deeper issues. But there was a mass shooting, for those of you in other countries, you might not even know this. There was a mass shooting at the celebration parade for the Kansas City Chiefs, who won the Super Bowl. I mean, they do it in other countries just for other sports, but so they won, and so they're having this parade where it's just people celebrating that they won the Super Bowl. And I wanted to bring you a bunch of aspects of this that are the hidden aspects of mass shootings in general. Now, the articles I've read, and these are, you know, could be updated by the moment, it's been 20-some people have been shot, but one person dead and a couple in critical condition. But the articles I've read so far don't seem to know for certain who did it or why or those type of things. There's some articles saying there was a dispute involved, but whatever.
I'd call that a big dispute.
It doesn't, a major dispute.
Did a dispute? A dispute is like when you call the corporate call center because you were like charged them. A dispute to me is not like the precursor to a mass shooting.
The dispute was, one person said, no, I don't think you can shoot 20 people. The other guy said, I bet I can. No, this is obviously horrific. And by the way, everyone, I forgot to say it, but please click thumbs up. Please share this. Please leave a comment. Anything you can do to help fight some of the suppression and censorship. And also just to hype what I'm going to bring to the members at Locals today. I'm going to destroy Sam Harris later today in his gutless, disgusting defense of genocide and of Israel. I'll be covering that to everybody at Locals.
Do all kids who played with wrestling figurines as kids like have that voice down pat?
Destroy!
Because I don't.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
We practiced that growing up.
I figured.
Macho Man Randy Savage.
I don't know what that means. Sounds gross, though.
It does sound kind of gross. I mean, he did do the Slim Jim commercials, which were pretty nasty. Okay, so, but back to this shooting, and I wanted to bring you the top 10 things that they won't tell you as they cover this mass shooting. You will see coverage, and you've probably already seen coverage all over mainstream media, all over some independent outlets. It is horrible. It's so terrible. But there are so many deeper aspects of mass shootings, some of which we've mentioned before on this show, some of which we hadn't. But this is what the coverage, what we're about to get into, is what the coverage should look like if our mainstream media was actually doing their job. And I don't know which of these top 10 you'd like to start with. Shall we start with the fact that 99% of all of these mass shooters are male? Like, should that not matter? Because people like to talk about, like if it were an Arab person, and I think there's been like one or something in our list of mass shooters, they love to go, oh my God, it's an Arab. That matters, right? It matters that it's them. Well, shouldn't it matter that 99% are male?
Oh, well, wasn't there one where I can't remember if I believe it was a trans woman.
Right, there was one.
And so then everybody was trying to say, this is what happens. This is why trans healthcare and like trans people shouldn't exist. And I'm like, do we want to talk about like the cis men who, because in my mind, then cis men shouldn't exist if that's your argument.
Right. If you really want to
like, what?
If you really want to go after who's perpetrating these shootings, it is men. And so that's one on the list, but we're going to get into some other details about that, societal details about why this is happening, men, in a few minutes. But I also wanted to, this is one of my, in my opinions, one of the most important things about these mass shootings is that, let's see, where is it? It's David Swanson. That at least, and it's actually probably higher than this, at least 31%, almost a third of mass shooters were trained by the U.S. military. These are mass shooters, obviously, in the United States. These are not people on military missions. And they were either in the military, they're a veteran, they were in ROTC. Over this 31% that he was able to find just from newspaper articles. So he doesn't have like deeper information, which would probably reveal that it's over 31%.
Well, and when you consider like how that, I mean, and we're going to talk a little bit about the culture of violence in a second anyway, but like how that permeates into where you would otherwise learn to shoot, like a shooting range. Like every single shooting range is rah military and Blue Lives Matter and shit like that. So that is, and a lot of people who either work there or go through there are either former military, former cops, things like that. There was one guy when I went to one that was like literally in his fatigues and like talking to people. And I was like, this is terrifying because he could just like have an episode right now, it seems, because he's like in his fatigues, just shooting wildly. But it's like, so when you think of it that way, then, I mean, the percentage just has got to be even higher.
Right. The culture of just how to use these weapons is pretty screwed up. Another one on the list that should be talked about a lot is that this is unique to the United States. There's a lot of coverage where it's like, man, what are we going to do about this? These things just happen. And it's like, it's interesting because in other countries, they don't just happen. There's not just mass shootings all the time. And there may be large shootings in some other countries, but they're very, very rarely is it someone who just decides, I want to see how many innocent people I can kill. Like that almost never happens. It is really almost an exclusively American thing.
Which is also why we can't just talk about, well, I mean, we have to talk about several issues. One, of course, is how easy it is to get guns, and especially guns that are meant to kill the most amount of people at once, like, automatic weapons, but also the culture of violence. And this brings us to the next point, which, and I believe both of us have interviewed. She's a psychoanalyst, Dr. Harriet Fraud, who she does a lot of segments with Professor Richard Wolff as well. And she did a study that found, I can't remember the exact number, but it's above 90% of the men the mass shooters, had just recently, before they went on this mass shooting spree, basically had either lost a job, a woman, or both. And her point was that the way that we understand masculinity is that your worth is tied to your ability to hang on to a woman as your property, and also your connection to the outside world, because you can't have friends. You have to go through, she's your social network. And also, your manliness, your worth as a man is connected to your ability to earn money. And if you can't do that, then you are a lame man. You're not even worthy of being called a man. However, one of the things that can bring you back to being a man is to have a gun and to use it. And she actually highlights several ads, like AR-15 put out an ad that basically said, like, get back your man card. And it had all these, and one of them was like, does your wife make more money than you? You know, your man card's been revoked. Here's how to get it back. An AR-15. Like, what? And they actually had, I can't remember which company, but they had the ex-girlfriend cutout that you could practice your marksmanship on. So that's really healthy.
Yeah, horrific.
And so this kind of mentality around like the loss of masculinity has perpetuated, at least been a large factor in perpetuating these mass shootings.
And let's see, to go back to what you were saying about type of guns that can kill so many people at once. Now, neither you nor I are like a no guns absolutist in any way, yet people who listen to all of my live streams have heard me say this before, so I'm sorry to repeat it, but it is never talked about on really anywhere that almost all of us, like right wing, left wing, doesn't matter, almost all of us are for some level of weapon control. There are very few people I've ever met who think that their neighbor should have a Harrier jet in their front yard, or, you know, just be able to take off in his Black Hawk and just gun down entire neighborhoods. Like, there is almost anyone I know supporting that. So therefore, once we agree we're all on the spectrum of some sort of weapon control, it's really just where the needle lands as to what size gun we find is allowable. And if that's the case, then let's have that discussion. There, you know, people love to say, oh, it's not the gun that, you know, guns don't kill people kill people. Yeah, but the type of gun lets you kill a whole lot of people before anyone can do anything about it. Just like if we were all walking around with bombs that would take out whole neighborhoods, then I think you'd see a lot more of that, wouldn't you? So it is just, and NRA doesn't want it. No one wants to have that discussion because it's a nuanced discussion that acknowledges that we're somewhere on this sliding scale, and it just infuriates everyone.
And I
just wanted to read this comment from this person because I don't think we'll get to it. And I just wanted, I really appreciate the donation. I don't quite understand what's being said, 11th hour. But I'll tell you why people do this. People have a habit emerging from society, take a shot and disappear into society. And this repeats, society equals the enemy. So, yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure what they're saying there either. But the point that I wanted to make was that, again, with like the nuance aspect is that like there's, damn it. Where was I going with this? There's
sliding scale though.
Right. So like, for instance, like when the Black Panthers started walking around with their rifles and they had like the legislation that showed that they were allowed to do it on hand, that wasn't okay. Right. And they literally passed a Black Panther. It was nicknamed that, the Black Panther legislation, that made it illegal to open carry rifles, not because they were afraid of white people doing it, because white people have been doing it forevers. Right. Because they didn't like the idea of Black people doing it. So I am very much against the idea of the state having a monopoly on violence. And also, we need to be really clear on what it means for the people to be armed in a system that has always protected white violence against non-whites with weapons, and how that also has a way of affecting how we perceive this issue of guns. I also don't think like a former friend of mine, I mean, she died. That's why she's not my friend anymore, but it's not like we had a falling out. But she said, I don't think that we can't compete with the US firepower. So she used to be a Black Panther. And she said, at that point, I thought that this could be something that we could do. Now I don't. And so how does that also shape our understanding of what the gun culture in the US means? And I'm posing that question as somebody who does not have a very specific answer. So that's all I wanted to add
there. Thank you, Nadia, for the donation. Nadia has a little clarification on the gender aspect. Aiden Hale, the Nashville shooter, and Alec McKinney, the Denver shooter, were trans men. Only Snoochia Mosley in Aberdeen, Maryland, was a trans woman. The Colorado Springs shooter lied about his gender. So, yeah, there you go. And of course, people want to point to the 0.001% that is a trans person shooter and say that shows trans people are dangerous, which really is the exception. It says the opposite, honestly. I wanted to read a quote from this article real quick. The shooting comes after a near record number of mass shootings in 2023.
Every year is a record.
Yeah. No other high-income country has suffered such a high death toll from gun violence. Every day, 120 Americans die at the end of a gun, including suicides and homicides, an average of 43,375 a year. God, that number even shocked me. That's insanity.
That's a lot.
According to the latest available analysis of data from 2015 to 2019, the U.S. gun homicide rate was 26 times that of other high-income countries. Its gun suicide rate was nearly 12 times higher. So just crazy stats about what's going on here.
And I think that also points out, like with the suicide aspect, the culture of gun violence also as it pertains to people who are really struggling with their own mental health and don't have access to anything but a gun. And that's how they deal with that problem.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many we are at now, but like speaking of the military, I mean, veterans die every day from suicide. So like this is all,
it was 25 a day, wasn't it?
Right. And I don't know what the number is now. That was like 10 years ago that I read that. But like these are all intricately connected when it comes to the culture of violence and in particular gun violence in this country.
Another point you wanted to get to that is rarely ever discussed, or actually the opposite. They say the opposite often on media, on our mainstream media, is these are almost never lone wolves. And you and I were nearly killed by a terrorist in the Charlottesville, the one during Trump years, where the man drove through the crowd in Charlottesville. He missed us by a couple of feet and killed Heather Heyer. And he also was not a lone wolf. This was a guy that had a big connection to large groups online who supported terrorism against people they disagreed with.
Right. And this is we don't know anything about this shooter, but particularly the ones who have, who go to a specifically crowded place and seem to be doing it like at random. But in reality, it's part of a larger network. They oftentimes will find manifestos either that they've posted publicly or that they find them in their homes or something. And they've been talking online with vast networks of far right-wing fascistic cells, I guess you'd call them, and planning and basically saying go out and do this. It's manly, right? Or go out and do this because the liberals and the immigrants and the black people and the out of control women, witches or whatever are ruining our society, and we need to go kill them. So the idea that these are lone wolves belies the idea, the point that there are these vast networks that again are not dealt with, right? There's one there's one Muslim person who commits a crime and everyone's like, oh my God, there's terrorist cells everywhere and Hezbollah's at the border, and yet white men continue to mass murder people. And everyone's like, well, that guy was just sick in the head and a lone wolf. And what can he do? And it's no, this is actually if you go back to the founding of this country is built on that kind of sick, twisted mass violence at the hands of predominantly white dudes. And so that is something that is not discussed and could be dealt with systemically if it weren't, again, for the fact that that's the fabric that holds this country together.
Beautifully said, and a beautiful segue to another point we were going to make, that this all comes at a deeper societal level, comes from this kind of beautiful, perfect in a terrible way, stew of glorification of violence. We'll talk more about that in a second. The glorification of military and police, massive guns all over the place, immense inequality, which is a key aspect of anywhere you generally see these type of things, and the destruction of community. There's little to no real community across America. I mean, there are some exceptions, but across America these days, people have are increasingly falling into a solitary space, and they try and find that community online, sometimes in these horrible groups. But most of them, like you said, had lost a woman, which would be part of their community, and or lost a job, which would also connect them to the community.
But also, like, the women are particularly in these traditional relationships, they're the keeper of the social network, right? Because we've had this conversation too, like that men. I think it's different with like youth now, like the 25s and unders, and I'm so glad to see it. But like that dudes can't call each other to say like, hey, do you want to go for a walk? Because that'd be gay, which would be bad, I guess.
Can you not bring that gay stuff to the podcast? Can we just not have that kind of stuff?
But it's like, whereas like I can call a friend and be like, hey, do you want to go for a walk? And then do you want to like hug afterwards? And then we can have tea. Like,
I have to be like, do you want to go have a beer and punch each other in the chest? Hello. Hey, let me hit you on the jaw to say hello. And
it's like, what do you have to do to like, how many beers do you have to have before you actually like
before you finally make out? A lot, like a lot.
No, before like you say to a friend like, hey man, I'm really like struggling with depression. Like, could you say that even after like 8 beers?
That would be all of the beers.
Yeah,
all of the beers.
Whereas like I can literally just text a friend and be like, I feel like shit right now. Can we talk? And it's like,
anyway, that with a connection to the fact that our consumerist capitalist world is just vapid shit. It's all vapid shit. Like there's so much of our lives that is meaningless. I'm not saying it all is. There's some meaning in life, but what we've created here in this society is just so immensely vapid. Like most jobs are bullshit. And so it's like people don't have a connection to anything, what they're creating, what they're doing in the world. I mean, a real connection. I mean, a real in your soul connection. Instead, it's like I work at Banana Republic and I fold the clothes and all society would unfold. Society would collapse if I wasn't there to fold the collared shirts. Like that has become our reality. So it's like people are left just empty and yeah, it's like that all mixes into this massive stew. And you sprinkle in giant guns and see how it goes. Okay, last thing I think on the list was we've only glossed over it was, or grazed it, was glorification of violence. And you wanted to make the point about the fact that this was at an NFL parade.
Yeah, I mean, and look, if I watch baseball, so I'm not like, ooh, you enjoy like I don't care. That's not what I'm talking about. But
she doesn't watch that much baseball,
and I don't.
She watches some,
and mostly in person, which I haven't done in like 5 years. So okay, to be honest, I at times, so basically. There at all of these big sporting events, it is now like an ad for the US military. You got jets flying over. There's like a veteran of the game thing where they like highlight the veteran. If you don't stand for that damn national anthem, people could like throw drinks on you and shit.
Or how about Kaepernick? Entire career done because he wouldn't stand for the national anthem.
So it's like these things in and of themselves glorify the culture of violence. And you have to be like, you have to support the troops, which means supporting the military, of course, not actually supporting troops and like mental health care and, you know, not sending 18-year-olds to kill other people for no reason. And like, so this is, again, connected to the bread and circus, just like it was in ancient Rome, right? Like the glorification of the empire. And we cannot separate the violence that happens at home with the violence that happens abroad. We are an imperialist culture of violence, which means necessarily that it's why a lot of cops like beat their wives, because it's like, you can't be violent when you go to work and then come back and be like, oh, I just like to do some yoga and meditate together. Like, is that cool? Like that's not a thing. So the idea is like when the U.S. uses to roughly quote Chris Hedges here, speaks a language of violence abroad, they're going to speak that same language at home. And of course we see that. Look at our cops, the way they are extremely militarized, and they are an oppressive occupying force in predominantly, of course, non-white neighborhoods. And so this idea that we can decouple the culture of violence from what's happening, for instance, in Gaza right now, where people are being bombed by US weaponry, you cannot separate that from mass shootings in the United States because it's all intertwined in this disgusting culture of violence.
I can't do better than that, so I'm not going to try.
Okay. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
We still need to talk about what's going on with Julian Assange and some other stories, I believe. And then after that, just for the folks at Locals, I am going to destroy Sam Harris and his disgusting cowardice on
What's your wrestling
Israel.
name?
What is my wrestling name?
Oh, Lee the Great, right?
Lee the Great. How about Lee the Destroyer?
Lee the Destroyer.
Okay, but the rest of this, Julian Assange, etc., we're going to head over to rumble.com/leecamp, rumble.com/leecamp. Free to watch over there and Locals. So please head over there. Like I said, completely free to watch. Hit subscribe, hit share, all those good things. Okay, rumble.com/leecamp. Doing it now. You can start this story.
Okay, so as folks may or may not know, but you will as soon as I read this headline. Ooh, excuse me. Next week is an important date. Basically,